Breaking tonight, 6 days since the election, and some in the media are still publicly struggling with how to deal with the results of last Tuesday. Just in the last 24 hours, we saw New York Times columnist Charles Blow complaining that, quote, "We are living in two diverging Americas, at odds and at battle. Trump's America won this round." E.J. Dionne Jr. of the Washington Post writing, quote, "Let's be clear, the United States of America is not Donald Trump's country." And in the same publication, Jonathan Capehart writes about, quote, "Why millions fear the looming Trump presidency," adding, "President-elect Trump has made promises that represent a threat to real lives and livelihoods. Some are unconstitutional. All are immoral." Joining me now, Howard Kurtz, host of Media Buzz, and Mollie Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Great to see you both. So, hey, Mollie, let me ask you, do you take issue with those headlines?
Oh, I mean, it's just been kind of surprising to see how poorly many in our media have handled this election. Part of it is just that they are in liberal bubbles and that the people that they're surrounded by are also struggling, so they're kind of focused on that side of the story. But a big part of it is that they can't really come to terms with Donald Trump being president until they come to terms with just how profoundly they failed to cover this election well. And this is not just about the polls. This is not about trusting in them too much. This is about really misunderstanding the nature of the race, misunderstanding how Hillary Clinton was viewed by a lot of Americans, as well as Donald Trump. And then most importantly, I think, profoundly misunderstanding who Donald Trump voters were. And you see that in these headlines you just pointed out. There's still a hostility and an inability to even try to understand what motivated his supporters.
Howie, do you agree with that?
You know, liberal commentators are entitled to their opinion, but some of them have been really ugly in refusing to accept the outcome of this election, Megyn, and they continue to attack Donald Trump. They continue to call the people who voted for Donald Trump racist and morons. We're talking here about 60 million American voters, and some of them are beating up on the press because it was our job somehow to stop Donald Trump, which, of course, is not our job. But I'm even more troubled by the elements in the mainstream media that are still hostile to varying degrees toward the guy who has won the election 6 days ago.
Now, but how do you square this with the genuine controversies that Trump himself created, right? Because the media you can't have the Access Hollywood bus thing break and then have 12 women come forward saying that he assaulted them and ignore it, right? And so how do you square, Mollie, things like all the controversies Trump himself created, you know, like, hey, there's my African-American, and the Mexico's not sending its best people, and all that stuff that he did generate controversy with media bias?
Well, all of those things are real, and everybody is very familiar with all of Donald Trump's weaknesses. This is where I think it gets back to the fundamentals of the race and what actually motivated voters. I mean, one of the things that was interesting about the Hillary Clinton campaign is that they wanted to focus on Donald Trump's personality, and that did make for very good copy and very good TV, and there's a reason why we focus on it, because it's very dramatic. At the same time, there were serious policy issues in play, support for his plans on immigration, foreign policy, economic policy, as well as something that I think even, you know, many people who did kind of pick up on these things didn't realize, which is a very big frustration with political correctness itself. And people are just kind of sick of that kind of focus, and they're punching back.
That's true. The political correctness thing is real, Howie, and we've been covering it for years now. And I do think that there's a segment, you tell me, of media that doesn't get that and just thinks that there's something wrong with you if you don't want to clean up our language, our politicians' language, and our language as a society.
I think it's worse than that. I think for some in the media, there's something wrong with you if you somehow supported Donald Trump and not seeing that the country has moved to a different place. Now, it's fine for journalists to continue to report aggressively on President-elect Trump, but let me just read you one sentence from a New York Times news story. This is when President-elect Trump visited President Obama at the White House. Mr. Trump, whose campaign drew support from white supremacist groups, sat in front of a bust of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. It's that kind of thing that sends the signal that we're not over it, we're not going to get over it. Now, the Times editor and publisher did put out sort of a modified mea culpa. Maybe we underestimated Trump. But this kind of thing just signals that it's almost like announcing we're going to be in the loyal opposition for the next 4 years, instead of giving the guy a fair shot at showing he can be president.
And I mean, to diminish his, 60 million voters as summed up by the white supremacists who did support him, doesn't quite get it. Mollie, let me ask you, because some of the media, like we saw New York Magazine with this cover before the election, right? So you wonder why some in the general population think that some of the media are not being fair. They have an agenda. They have their thumb on their scale when it comes to now President-elect Trump.
Well, and I mean, clearly they did, and people were very overt about that, and there's actually a benefit to that. We had a lot of people come out and just admit that they thought that their job was to keep Donald Trump from becoming president and to help Hillary Clinton get into office. It's good to know where people stand. Unfortunately, there's been, therefore, a complete destruction of that trust relationship between viewers, readers, listeners, and the media. And so the media need to do a very good job of, first of all, coming to terms with just how serious the failure was. And they really need to start doing that quickly because it hasn't happened yet. Then they also need to just start reporting the news and not telling people what to think about it. Their spin is not nearly as crafty as they think it is, and people are seeing through it. And
well,
then
they may be out of touch with, flyover country, real Americans.
Well,
not that you're not a real American on the coast, but just Americans who live in the heartland who just have different values and see the world differently
yes,
than the people media surround themselves with.
All Americans are real Americans, but you're not seeing a lot of diversity in American newsrooms. And so I think that people who run newspapers and magazines and radio programs and television programs, they really need to make sure that they're getting an intellectual diversity in those newsrooms.
True. However, Howie, that is not, I mean, let's be honest here. Many of the Trump supporters were, I mean, incendiary in their hate for certain reporting, and I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but for certain reporting that was critical of Donald Trump or skeptical of Donald Trump, that was right on the money. Controversies that he generated.
There's no question that all of us in the news business, when we did do legitimate questioning of incendiary statements Trump had made or things about his record, got a lot of ugliness and abuse online, and I'm not excusing that. But look at the coverage, the muted coverage of these protests. Imagine if Hillary Clinton had won and Trump supporters were out there demonstrating in cities saying, not my president, and in some cases engaging in violence.
They'd be saying they're all sexist. They'd be saying they're all sexist. Exactly. If it had been President Obama, they'd been saying that they're racist. I know. We've seen that double standard. Great to see you both.
Same here, Megan.